So the other day, while implementing a drag and drop workflow in an Angular 1.6 application, I was running into an issue where when I was dragging an element around, the mouse was actually causing undesirable mouse interactions with the rest of the page. And I solved this problem by creating what I was calling a drag shield, which is essentially just a div that I overlay over the entire viewport during the drag operation so as to act as an event sink to prevent mouse events from reaching lower levels of the DOM tree. So to see this in action, I have a bunch of draggable items here that are constrained to this box. And actually, let me turn off my drag shield. And the idea is that I click and I can drag this around. And what you can see is that as I hover over, right, these things turn pink. Now, as I click and drag and I hover into other elements, you can see that the other elements take focus. And that's because they're still in the DOM tree that's accessible by the mouse events. Similarly, if I drag outside, you can see that my cursor here has changed to the text selection cursor, despite the fact that I'm dragging an element. I don't want to be able to select text or anything like that. So to get around this, what I do is I create a drag shield, which will start to show when I drag. And it'll be very obvious when this happens in this particular demo. So I'm going to click and start dragging, and you can see I have this giant pink border here. And I have a label down here. And essentially what this is if you look over here, it's this div element. You can see class drag shield, and that's going to show here and then hide, right? And then if I click again, you'll see it shows, and I can hide it again. And essentially, that div element has a z index that's high enough to overlay over all the other elements of the page, so that this full viewport element here is capturing all of my mouse movement events, such that I'm no longer getting any interaction with lower level DOM elements. Now, this is not a perfect solution, meaning that it's not the right solution for every drag and drop situation, but for my particular use case, this ended up being a perfectly nice and easy to implement solution. So let's just take a look at the code to see how it works. So here's my draggable component, and that's this box here with all these items in it. And you'll see that each of the draggable items emits a drag start and a drag end event. And when the drag starts, I call this enable drag protection, and when the drag ends, I call disable drag protection. And if we jump down to this method, what you can see is that this disable and the enable drag protection, all they're doing is setting a simple Boolean property for is protecting drag action. Now, this is protecting drag action is being used to render that div at the bottom of the page there, right, is protecting drag action. And this is the thing that had the big pink border and is high enough and overlaid over the rest of the viewport such that it acts as, again, it's going to capture every mouse event because it's the only element that the mouse can actually reach. And it's going to prevent unwanted mouse interactions with the rest of the elements. So again, this drag shield here, that's what I see when I click and I drag, and that's this element here being rendered in the bottom of the DOM over the rest of the app. And it, again, acts as a mouse sync. So you can see that actually the item that I'm dragging currently isn't even registering the mouse over, right? It's not pink, whereas if I let go, it turns pink because my mouse is now over it. If I click and drag, it's no longer pink because it's technically not being hovered over because the drag shield element is acting as the event sync for mouse events and is therefore not allowing the drag element to be denoted as hover. Of course, I could simply use the drag events to add a class to indicate that this is hovered. And again, it only goes to show this is not a fix-all for all drag and drop situations. This is just something that happened to be really helpful for the particular use case that I was dealing with. Now, the point of this demo was to demonstrate the drag shield. It wasn't really to get into any of the draggable stuff. But it might be worth just looking at this quickly because it's important to understand how the drag works with this drag shield in place. So essentially, here's my component metadata. You can see that it defines the output events, my input events for positioning the actual element. As a side note, I just love how freaking easy Angular makes it to define all of this stuff, especially these host bindings. Here I'm taking inputs and I'm turning around and I'm turning those into CSS properties on the host. I don't know, it's just super elegant, I think. But anyway, let's take a look at the mouse down event. So when the user clicks mouse down on the draggable item, what you'll see is that I'm adding a mouse up and a mouse move listener on the window. So even though I have this drag shield that goes into place, I can still capture mouse movement and mouse up events because I'm also binding an event listener on the window in the internal details of this draggable widget tree. And that's what allows me to still power the mouse movement and the drag positioning calculations, despite the fact that I'm not getting those low-level mouse interactions that I might get otherwise. Now, when you code a drag and drop situation, you're almost always going to add mouse listeners at a very high element, whether it's the window or the document. I don't think that matters very much. But you're almost never going to do that on the element itself, simply because the mouse can move faster typically than the browser is able to update the position of the elements. Therefore, if you try to attach these things to lower level DOM elements, it's going to end up with jank, and you're going to get things that don't update properly or fast enough, and the user is going to feel that jank in the interaction. So having to bind these to the window isn't really related to the drag shield, but it is here. I am pointing out just to demonstrate that that is how the mouse continues to interact with the drag workflow despite the fact that the drag shield is in place. And then of course, when I mouse up, I'm emitting the drag end, and the drag end calls the disable drag protection. The disable drag protection sets this value to false, which of course then hides the drag shield. So again, here let's take a look at it one more time without the drag shield in place. You can see as I drag here, I get interactions with other elements on the page that I didn't mean to. Plus you can see, I don't know if it picks up in the video, but sometimes that's pink and sometimes that's black. And that's again because the mouse is able to move faster than the browser is able to update the element. So that's why you almost always want to attach mouse listeners at a very high level of the DOM during a drag and drop operation. And again, just one more time, contrasting with the drag shield. The drag shield goes into place when I start to drag, and that prevents the mouse from interacting with other areas of the page that are unrelated to the drag event. So anyway, I thought this was interesting enough and useful enough to share, but again, not the right situation or not the right solution for every drag and drop situation.